Much like the chin, the nose is a box, essentially. It's got a front plane, it's got two side planes, it's got a bottom plane. There's no top plane, of course, because the top of the nose goes rhythmically into the brow in this beautiful little shape. See this kind of wedge-like shape? It's almost like a keystone, the top of an archway. That's how it wedges in with the brow. So we'll look at that, and like everything else, even though the nose is essentially like a box with the front and sides and a bottom, it does get quite complex. In fact, the bottom plane alone, there are 6 different planes in here, if you can believe that. And we'll look at all of them, including things like the nostrils, and see how those fit in. There is a lot of little subtle rhythms that come in here. The nose is not just flat at the bottom. There's like a little S-curvy shape in here as it twists and turns around. The other thing that always strikes me as impressive with the nose is just the sheer depth or breadth, I should say, of the side plane. This is such a big plane. Critical to understand how this plane articulates and moves in and out of the cheek, and then how it feeds up into the eye socket. So we'll look at all that, and we'll also start discovering another important rhythm, the laugh line area. As the laugh line kind of comes down from the nose, this will become important later on in our discussion with the mouth and the chin. These all kind of link together, and we'll begin that rhythm here in the nose chapter. So strap in, there's a lot of stuff to get to. So yeah, I'm not gonna lie, the nose has a lot of planes and it can be pretty complex. However, at its core, it's basically just a box. So I'll draw this box like this, and of course it's angled on the head. And let's just draw the underside of this box. Throw a little value on it. And there, if you can draw that, you're well on your way to being able to draw the nose. Let's take it one step further. Same box, side plane here. However, this time I'm going to add some more information at the bottom. Namely, I'm going to have one more plane like this, another plane like that, slowly turning under. Then I'll just connect these guys, and my box no longer lines up. So I'll just erase the side plane and just kind of make it line up like this, widening the berth of the side of the nose here. And then same as before, any plane that points down, I will just give it this quick value. And now this is looking more nose-like, right? Still very boxy. If I wanted to further modify this particular drawing, what I would do is I would chisel away this, chisel away that. This makes a new plane here, a new plane there. All right, let me just move these over to the side because I want to do another one. Yet another iteration. Let's start with the box again. Side plane here, let me just anticipate the widening of the side. I'll grab those same planes here. The nose turns under. This, that, that. Now I want to do something here. I want to get rid of this, and I want to make this the widest part. Goes in, and then let's have it come out and in. There, something like that. And then at the top, I'm just going to create this little wedge shape like this, wedge shape like that. So not forget to throw in our value for the underplanes, just to clearly signal what turns under. Also, this part of the plane is turning underneath, so we get a value there. And just for fun, let's throw a value on the entire side of the nose just to show the dimensions of this box. And in that 3-step process, we've gotten something that pretty much encompasses the planes of the nose. Now I've got some actual finished step diagrams here that show a little more clearly the shape of each plane, and we'll look at these as we go. But again, just like a box, what we essentially have are 2 side planes, side, side, and a top plane. Of course, in 3/4 view, you only see one of the sides and the top. And the top is foreshortened. It appears thinner because of the foreshortening. And the side appears wider because, of course, we're perpendicular to this plane. We can see it flat on. Versus from the front where we see this plane flat on, and the side plane is foreshortened. Looking at the Andrew Loomis diagram of the profile view of the nose, let's look at that frontmost facing tip. This is the tip that points out the most. This is like the peak of Mount Everest. In fact, the nose reminds me of like a mountain. It's like a jagged landscape protruding out of the face. This is the peak point right in there. Let's just draw a nice horizontal. And we notice that the bottom of the wing of the nose is a step down. It's a significant step lower than the tip. This is important because it creates a rhythm. It creates maybe yet another sad face rhythm. There's this curve that goes up. When you see the nose from a front view, these planes from the wing of the nose, the front of the nose, and the wing of the nose, they kind of have this curve rhythm to it. And the lower angle you have on the head, like if we're looking at our sorrow head here, which is a lower angle, that curve is intensified. That's a little tip from the front view. On a 3/4 view, it doesn't quite work because this side plane here kind of throws that rhythm off. It's, you know, it goes up and then down. I mean, you could just remember that rhythm also. It's like a little bit of an S curve. But this downward sloping curve or another sad face rhythm is a nice trick for the front view of the nose. Also the side view, you can think about this sweeping curve. Also, while we're still looking at the bottom of the nose, it's important to note that the nose wraps under before coming back up. There is this circular rhythm that it has, and then it, you know, comes out here. Looking at it from a front view here, these planes extend lower. If I were to draw a horizontal line, they extend lower than the wings. This series of middle planes here are grouped together and called the septum. It's a pretty common anatomical term you've probably heard before, the septum. The septum is the thing that people get pierced sometimes. Again, if we were to draw that horizontal line, which in this case is in perspective, the septum is lower than the wings. So the septum comes down, sweeps up, and turns. You get this circular S-curvy kind of rhythm. And you get it both in the front view and in the 3/4 view, although it's more emphasized in the 3/4 view because we're looking at it more obliquely. Another look at the nose from the front view this time. Can you see the sad face rhythm there? Also, this plane here is right there on the nose. It's at a high point, and then that septum begins to come down, and then that plane dramatically changes angles. It starts to turn even more underneath, and then we have that S-curvy rhythm to go up to the wings, like this. And we can complete this quick diagram with this. And if we want, all of this points under, and if the light's coming from above, you'll get this, the nose would be in shadow. All of this would just be in shadow. All right, moving on. Let's now switch our focus to the top of the nose. Specifically, I'm interested in this wedge shape. This guy right here. This is an important shape because it connects the nose to the brow. Here's a fantastic model showing this wedge shape in action. In fact, it's hard to find a bad model for this because it's such a prominent piece of geometry on the head. The thing I love about it rhythmically is, remember when we did the brow, we had this line? It could either be straight or bowed upward or downward, whatever. We're looking a little bit up at this model, so the line here is pretty bowed upward. This top line right here follows the eyebrows, essentially. You can trace that top of the brow, that same line we were drawing before, also covers this top part of this wedge. This wedge is called the glabella, by the way. The glabella comes down to this point here, which on the model is right here. It's a convenient little thing to remember because it basically aligns with the top of the eyes themselves. That is, the upper eyelid. The glabella is more or less in line with that. And the shape itself is wedge-like, so it's, you know, it's got this pie slice sort of shape to it, except it doesn't come to a point. It stops, you know, it's got a thickness both at the top and at the bottom. Wider at the top, narrower at the bottom. And it also has a side plane. These side planes here, which you can see on a front view, build that geometry of the nose that we looked at just a minute ago. Remember we had side plane, front plane, side plane? Well, it's the same thing with the glabella. Side plane, front plane, side plane. On the Andrew Loomis diagram, now this is in profile, so the plane, the front plane of the glabella is extremely foreshortened. It's there, but it's just very narrow. The same with the front plane of the nose. The front plane of the nose is here. It's very foreshortened in a profile view, but it's here, and you can see the thickness of the side plane, this plane right here, that thickness right in there. Now, in the profile, it's also hidden by the eye, so it kind of goes behind the eye. We'll talk about that connection when we get to the eye. And the thing to remember is, remember we had the brow protruding out and then it came in? We did that in the brow section. Well, that in line is the glabella. So we're just adding to that chapter here. Looking at 3 different pieces of reference here. This guy has a pretty small glabella. It's compressed in. Obviously this plane, like any plane, will change a little bit according to the face. I mean, no one has the exact same planes everywhere. We all look a little different, right? So this guy's got a very narrow one. And the 2 women on the right have wider ones than he does. Again, you can follow this line. Now, don't be confused by her eyebrows. Look at the rhythm doing this. I know her eyebrows go up. They're, you know, they've been adjusted, let's say. Instead, look for the rhythm that the actual planes of the brow make. And anyway, you can see the glabella coming in. Here's the other side of that front plane. Here's where it stops and then changes direction out. Again, the glabella goes in. The front of the nose goes out. And here's that side plane that connects it to the brow. And of course, in a 3/4 view, we're not going to see the side plane on that side. It's just the front plane forms the contour. Same situation on the right, kind of following this line, which is fairly evenly straight across her head, I think. Very easy to spot the glabella in a 3/4 view because it forms the contour as the nose comes in, as that brow turned inward. The contour of the glabella follows that same parallel trajectory. And we can see the other side here, the thickness of that plane, and it would just connect like that. Speaking of its connection to the brow, one important thing to note is the glabella points in but does not go as far in as the actual brow did. Remember here in our brow diagram, we had that concavity in the skull. It digs into the head quite a bit. Well, the glabella does not go that deep. The eye sockets dig in pretty deep into the skull. The glabella is out here, so it doesn't go in as much. If I were to adjust my center line, thinking about adding the glabella to this, it would look like this. And let's get the front plane of the nose. This is more the centerline view of the nose. In a different color, I'll retrace our original center line. Our original center line, when we were not drawing the nose, went like that. The nose, like I said, juts out like a mountain, which dramatically alters the center line. Now the glabella often gets a little bit of light, which we'll talk about in the value section of this lesson once we get into how light affects the values we see on the head. But the glabella is often in a little bit of light because it does not go into the skull as much as the actual eye sockets do. But the thing to note though is that the glabella does go in. It does go in this way. So from a top view, you're not going to see it, or at the very least, it's going to be so foreshortened that it's almost nothing. Like we know the glabella is there, but because his head is pointed so extremely down, the glabella is simply hidden by the protuberance of the brow. All right, let's switch our focus now to this front plane of the nose all the way into what's usually called the ball of the nose. Pretty sure you've noticed that it's generally thinner here, thicker here. Models are subject to change from person to person, but in general, the ball of the nose is wider than the ridge of the nose. I'll bring up a skull diagram and we can see what's happening. Ignore all those numbers, by the way. I think it's pretty common anatomical knowledge to know that this is actually a hollow. Our nose is cartilage beyond a certain point. Beyond about here, which is right here on our skull, this is all cartilage. There's no superficial bone. However, this part of our skull is subcutaneous. The ridge of the nose here is subcutaneous. And if you look at the skull, can you see how the skull kind of widens out here? There's a widening to it. This is reflected in our nose diagram here. There's a widening out right where that bone is. And then where the bone goes away, in here, it can, not always, but it can narrow in. I think it's more common than not to see a nose that narrows after the bone goes away. Going back to this model, we see that same rhythm. See it widening out just a little bit and then narrowing in just a little bit. Everyone will have a different series of angles going on there, but look out for this rhythm. Widening, narrowing, before hitting the ball of the nose, which widens out again. And in fact, it widens out and then comes in again to meet the septum. So it's like narrow, wide, narrow, constantly switching back and forth. Even in very flat photogenic lighting like this, we can see that widening action, narrowing action, widening out for the ball of the nose, and then narrowing in for the septum. Now the front plane itself is pretty flat. Like there might be a little bit of roundness to it, but in general, this is a pretty flat surface. But once again, I'll remind you that everyone's different. The front plane of his nose is more round. The front plane of her nose is medium round. And the front plane of her nose appears to be a little flatter, maybe ever so slight rounded, but pretty flat. And I can hear some of you asking, oh, there's highlights on the nose. Talk about that. I will in the value section. The highlights on the nose sure are fun, but before we get dessert, we gotta eat our veggies, right? Probably the least understood plane of the nose are the two side planes. The thing that's less understood about them is how wide they are. What many people do is they narrow them like this. They'll kind of draw them like this. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not correct. No, they are very wide planes, and if I just move our guy down here a little bit, you can see on the Asaro head, you can see how wide it gives you. It actually extends further out than the wing of the nose. Now this is something that can change. You'll see different diagrams. Sometimes this plane, like the Asaro head shows, goes out. Sometimes it's sort of rhythmically in sync with the wing of the nose like this, but it does kind of take off from the sort of tip of the wing, if I can call it that, and it moves upward and bows out slightly, before coming in and giving room for the eyeball, specifically the tear duct of the eye, which would be down here. So it's this unexpectedly complex plane. You can see it pretty clearly on him thanks to the lighting. If we find this point, this tip of the wing here, which would basically be right in there, see how that side plane goes out slightly before coming in and then going straight up. So it's this action out, in, up, and then it meets the glabella, which we've already talked about. And of course, that same rhythm here, out, in, up. And this up part is very narrow. I mean, sometimes you'll see it as just like almost a V shape. Sometimes there will be an actual plane, a little straight part there, but it's a very narrow little crevice right there. In fact, I've kind of shown it differently on both sides, which is not an accident. There are different ways to draw these planes. And you'll see if you look up different anatomy diagrams, they don't all agree. But what they do agree on is this overall rhythm, out, in, up, and it meets the glabella. The straight-on lighting in this photograph gives us a fantastic view of the side planes of the nose. Here's that tip of the wing. We go up and out slightly, in, up, glabella. And of course, it's the same on the other side. And of course, it's the same on the other side. Just drawing some plumb lines, some measurement lines, just to make sure I'm roughly in proportion here. You can see it forms this rhythm, basically meeting the wings of the nose there. So the nose is a lot wider than you might think. I remember when I was first learning about these planes, it really shocked me how wide they were. I suspect the reason that the wideness is deceiving is because oftentimes there is a balling of flesh that happens here. That flesh happens to lay on top of these side planes and can kind of disguise the fact that there is a very wide plane here. And as a result of that, people will define the front plane here and they'll put the side plane very narrow, like something like this. But again, that is incorrect. It's not nearly enough depth for what the skull is doing. The skull is giving you something much more thick. Looking at a quick diagram here, can you see how much side there is to cover? That's a lot of depth there that needs to be accounted for, which is exactly what these side planes do. Now you'll notice I have indicated some lines that are basically the laugh lines. I don't want to focus on these yet, but I do want to quickly intro them. This laugh line rhythm, or the nasolabial furrow, is going to be an important connection to the mouth, which we'll cover in the next chapter. These laugh lines come in and overlap the side plane of the nose. They lay on top of it, and as a result can mask that plane a little bit. So we'll continue on with the nasolabial furrow in the next section, but that's how they interact with the nose. The thing that's important rhythmically with the nasolabial furrow or laugh line is that they are essentially an offshoot of the wing of the nose. It's the same sort of rhythm. They're almost parallel. It's just the laugh line continues further down where the wing of the nose stops right there. All right, there's one more thing to cover before we wrap up this chapter on the nose. And just for fun, let's change the diagram. I was getting tired of looking at those other ones. We have to discuss the wings of the nose, which will also include the nostrils. All right, the wings of the nose, as you can see in the diagram, are essentially like a box, but a box that's been severed. So it's kind of like this sort of shape, this being the bottom plane of the box. So we have a top plane and a bottom plane. The wing of the nose meets the side plane of the septum, this area right in here. There is some thickness to be dealt with there. And what I'll do is I'll first ballpark where the frontal part of the nose is, then connect that rhythmically, down, and then back in the beginning of this lesson, we remember this kind of S-curvy rhythm, right? So I consider this also part of the wing of the nose. The reason I consider it part of that is because the nostril actually rests on both of these planes. The nostril laterally goes across this plane, and then kind of foreshortened towards us comes out in this plane, and then down in this kind of thing. So the nostril is actually a three-dimensional hole, if you want to put it that way. And I just need a little bit more space on this bottom part here. There we go. So 2 takeaways so far. The wing of the nose has a top plane and a bottom plane. A secondary bottom plane, goes like that. And the nostril lies on both of the bottom planes. The tip of the nostril kind of exists on that one, the septum side plane, if you want to call it that, and comes out laterally this way. A complex piece of work, the nose. Here's an even lower angle view, which provides us maybe a little bit of a better outlook at that same series of planes, where you have that top plane of the nostril, which is foreshortened in this perspective, angling down underneath. And yeah, that plane meets the side of the septum here, so it comes down steeply here and across. And as we discussed, the nostril lays over both of those planes. And going back to our front view right here, this creates a kind of teardrop shape. If I were to just draw the shape of the nostril, the top of the nostril kind of overlaps like this, and it's this teardroppy shape. So this being the opening of the nostril itself. This is the way to kind of graphically indicate that tricky little perspective that's happening here. So don't draw your nostrils like this. That looks like a sewer grate or something. They need this little overlapping bit when drawn from the front view. You know, despite all those planes, the nose is not actually that hard to draw. I'm using her nose for inspiration here. I'm not going to copy it exactly. I'm using choppy lines, which helps when dealing with planes like this. You can also throw down, you know, these perspective lines. Make sure that, you know, this line going up, this line going slightly down, even more. You can also block in angles, just things that make your life easier. So at this point, instead of like doing the front plane, why not undo that and instead sort of estimate where the nostril might be. I already know that it's going to have this sort of overlapping action to it. I know that the wing of the nose sits lower than the septum. I can shade that nostril in real quick. Remember this S curvy rhythm, which is pretty subtle in this view. I mean, again, every nose is going to be different, but there's this S curvy rhythm to it. My block in line for the wing is not in the right spot. It's the right angle, but not in the right spot. The wing of the nose is wider out. Here's that top plane. When we come down for the bottom, trace it rhythmically to the side plane of the septum. Here's where we can find the septum. Remember, it gets a bit wider as it comes up, where it finally meets the ball of the nose. And this side is incorrectly drawn, so let's update that. I'm not trying to copy exactly this person's nose, just using it as inspiration. And then we can find this widening and shortening rhythm for the ridge of the nose as it leads us up to the glabella. A little hook here for the wing of the nose. And just to prepare us for later, we can extend a line downward, which it's very hidden on her. That line extends down this way, you know, following roughly parallel with the wing of the nose. Then the side plane of the nose on her looks like it sort of just does this kind of thing, coming in to meet the eye and then up. Let's get the tip of that front plane that sticks out the most. Now in terms of value, the bottom planes. Oh, and before that, remember this kind of sad face rhythm. This is also a plane right in here. So any plane that points down gets the value. We'll give the glabella a value as well because it points under. And then just for fun, the areas that point the most up, which is the front plane of the nose, we can apply a light value to, like we did with the cheekbones. Perhaps also the top of the wing can get a bit of a lighter value. This is not lighting per se, it's just kind of diagramming the nose with values that correspond to the angles that the planes face. We'll talk about actual lighting in another chapter. If we wanted to throw that side plane into just a bit of shadow, we could, just to tell the viewer that it's also turning. And if I really wanted to complete this, I could find the side planes of the septum, which would be something like that, and this side plane of the glabella. Okay, is that everything? I think that's everything. Let's do another one. Let's try a nose from a low angle, and to do this, I'll first start with the box. You know, this rough kind of box that we began this entire chapter with. Throw this line here, because low angles can be very complicated, and it helps, you know, to break it down using the fundamentals that we looked at. Let's get this sad face rhythm. Of course, this is in perspective, heavy perspective, so it's going to be very foreshortened like that on that side. I just want you to remember that it's the rhythms that make a drawing of the head look good, not any little plane that's correctly in alignment. If your rhythms are off, it doesn't matter what you do. For instance, let's get some perspective lines in just to help me with the septum. And then from here, I can go ahead and find it. The nostril is nice because I know the nostril spans two planes. So blocking in the nostril is often a helpful thing to do. On this side, it's going to be extremely foreshortened. We're not going to see this plane on this side, so the nostril just is going to kind of come out in perspective like that. The wing of the nose here going like that to match. Following my rhythm, my sad face rhythm. And cross contour the directions of these planes always helps. Go underneath like this. Let's make sure we get that S curvy rhythm that we talked about earlier. It's actually a bit flatter here from the bottom view. And then that side plane will come up, come out, come up like that to meet the glabella. Let's get some more perspective lines blocked in. These lines are great just to, they help me visualize, you know, what needs to be where. Now I know I should probably erase that line out a little bit. Let's get the glabella up here. the matching side here. We know that the brow line is here. The eyebrow would be somewhere there, probably somewhere here. And then to complete our diagram, let's just throw things into shadow. Again, starting with the underplanes of the nose, which is always a good place to start. Let's do the same to the glabella here. Glabella is just a fun word to say. And I didn't deal with the thickness of the front plane. If I wanted to put that in, essentially what I would do is widen the ball of the nose, make sure that my perspective stays in check. And there we go. I can get rid of this red line now. I don't really need it. Just kind of blocking my drawing of the wing. And speaking of the wing, we would still see just a sliver of the top plane of the wing from this view. We're not totally looking up at the nose. And that nasolabial furrow or laugh line would probably come out somewhere in this direction, somewhere in that direction. And I know that side plane looks very big, but remember, there will be fleshy areas that lay on top of it that will help mask it. We'll look at that later when we start painting the head. Okay. Let's do a 3/4 view slightly from above, so we're looking just a little bit down at the nose. Now remember, the nose does not cut flat like that. That's a common mistake. This could be an aesthetic design. This is okay. You can break the rules as much as you want, but it is helpful to know what the actual nature of the thing you're drawing is before you choose to do that. Here is the high point of the nose, or the point that sticks out the furthest, which of course gives us the septum turning under. Get that S-curvy rhythm. Get the wing. I'm just going a bit faster through this. Get the width of the bridge where the bone is of the skull coming down. Widen a little bit for the ball. We're not going to see that nostril opening because we're looking slightly down at this nose. So it's just going to appear to be this kind of flat sort of plane. Get the side plane here. And there we go, a bit of a quicker sketch of the nose. Always nice to throw a little value in there just to solidify this. Oh, and I didn't get the glabella. We're looking slightly down, so the glabella is going to be a bit differently shaped as it gets distorted by perspective. Of course, this whole thing just feeds into the underside of the brow, right? The stuff we discussed in the brow section. The glabella being slightly higher than the depression of the eye sockets, though, so we can get a bit of light there. And we'll get a light value, just for fun. Throw it into the front plane of the nose, top plane of the wing here. Also, worthy of note, in this view, we're not seeing the very bottom plane of the septum. This plane here is invisible here. This plane is that plane. Again, knowing these planes will really, really help you with all kinds of subtle perspectives. Super critical for, realistic portrait art or character design, things that need to adhere to nature a little more than, wild stylistic choices. But even your wild stylistic choices could be very informed by this kind of fundamental knowledge. And I'm just thinking that this is too low. If we're looking a bit down at the nose, this S-curve rhythm would be a little bit more pronounced. More like that. There we go. Get some laugh lines in there. Kind of block them in. All right. And we'll end with a profile view. The only major view we're missing. Here's where the nose sticks out the farthest. I can probably block in that slanted plane of the cheekbone. Tracing the septum down. Rough in where the wing might be. Get that nostril crossing planes. Find that sad face rhythm here for the underplane, just so we know what rhythmically it will look like. Then we can find maybe the septum plane, the plane that goes down to the wing. In a profile view, these are all very straight, aligned. Now, in the profile view, you will still get a bit of thickness on the front plane of the nose. Also, a little bit of thickness for the ball. Side plane following the angle of the cheekbone, cutting in a little bit. Now we know the glabella will start here, but this is a little weird, the arrangement of the glabella in a side view. You might be tempted to draw an angle like this, but that's not correct. Perspective will distort this. It looks more like this. We can get the top of that plane here and find the side plane of the nose here. So the side plane of the glabella kind of looks like this in a profile view. Let's give it some value. Let's put the entire glabella planes, both side and front, in shadow. As usual, get the underplanes in shadow. Let's throw the side in just a little bit of shadow as well. And I know the glabella looks a little weird in a side view. That's because later on, the eye will begin to overlap this area, which, kind of masks out the glabella. So this is an odd view to see it in. But just to give you some context, I'll expand on this drawing just a little bit. The cheekbone would lie somewhere out here. The break in the brow plane would be about there. Just to give you context for how that nose is fitting. All right, that'll about wrap it up for the nose. I know I got a bit ahead of myself on that last drawing. But without further ado, let's move on to the mouth.